Hi guys, welcome to Piece of Code and welcome to this video. So in this video it's going to be a little bit more interesting because we're going to cover a couple of things in this video. So in this video we're going to see how to create a CRUD app using Spring Boot and Amazon RDS, right? So as you all know that I'm going to create a separate detailed video on RDS later on for the certification purposes, but this is going to cover the practical aspect of RDS a lot more. Okay, so if you guys are interested in this development scenario, then please this will be very helpful to you guys. So RDS, as you know, is a it's a managed it says managed relational database service, right, of AWS. So basically using this RDS service you will be able to create multiple relational databases like MariaDB, SQL, PostgreSQL and lot more. Okay, it also provides with Aurora database, which is AWS's own proprietary database. So yeah, so we're going to create a database on RDS, a SQL database on RDS, and then we're going to create a CRUD app using Spring Boot, which is going to have 4 API endpoints. So the idea behind this application is pretty simple. It will going to be a employee directory. Basically it will be an application for which keeps the track of all the employees in an organization. So keep this simple. We'll only have 4 API endpoints. One API endpoint will be the /create API endpoint, which will be used to create the employee. Then there will be an /update endpoint, which will be used to update the employee. For example, if you want to change the name or I don't know, some other feature of the employee. And then there will be a fetch or get, whatever, like find the employee, right? It will be used to find the employee by ID. And the fourth one will be /delete. For example, it will be used to delete the employee I don't know, by ID or something like that. So what will happen? All of these endpoints will be communicating whatever operations is going to be done to a MySQL database, which will be on Amazon RDS, right? And this, I don't know, this database you can name it as, I don't know, employee DB or something like that. Okay, yeah, so that is pretty simple. That is everything that we will do in this particular video. It's a pretty simple application. We're going to go step by step. I will show you how to create the Spring Boot app and how to create all this API, all the controller, service and repository layer logic, and I'm also going to show you how to create the RDS database, the instance and everything, and we're going to then test it using Postman, like if it is working or not, and we're going to learn a lot more in this particular video. Okay, so yeah, without wasting much time, let's jump into it, and let's first of all create the RDS database and then go and create the Spring Boot application. Okay guys, so let us create that RDS MySQL database that I was talking about. So I've already logged into my AWS account. Okay, and here you just have to search for RDS over here. So RDS stands for Relational Database Service, and it's a managed relational database service on AWS. So if you want to create any kind of relational database like MySQL, Oracle DB, or PostgreSQL or MariaDB, so these are all relational databases, right? So if you want to create any kind of database like this, you can directly go to this managed service and you can create your database of your own. And it also provides you with a lot of other features like read replicas and multi-easy feature and everything. So yeah, it's very handy and you can use it. So let's go to this database section over here. It will show you if you have any instances of any databases that you have created, but currently there are no databases as of now. I'm going to create one right now. and it says instances because the underlying hardware whatever is used in RDS is EC2 instances only. So basically it's same as installing MySQL server on an EC2 instance, but the catch over here is that you don't have to maintain anything or install anything. Everything will be like managed by AWS only. That's why it is a managed service. Okay, so you can manage it by self if you create it in your EC2 instance or whatever, but over here AWS will take care of that, and it will also take care of all your high availability features if you want to incorporate it, right? Okay, so keeping that aside, let us click on create database, and we're going to go with the standard create option. We're going to explore all of these things whatever we have over here. So using RDS you can create any kind of RDS databases like MariaDB, PostgreSQL, Oracle. I've told you, right? It's pretty simple. Aurora is AWS's own proprietary relational database, okay, and it claims that it provides you with 5 times more efficiency as compared to MySQL, and 3 times more efficiency or 3x more efficiency compared to PostgreSQL, okay. But it also costs you a little bit more, and basically it is not available in the free tier. If you are using AWS, you will get the free tier, right, for 1 year, but I don't think Aurora is there in the free tier. You can use it if you want, but I'm going to go with the MySQL database, okay, because we're going to integrate it with our Spring Boot app, right? So we're going to go with the MySQL database. You can choose any database of your own, and you can connect with your Spring Boot app, whatever you want, right? But for now, let's go with MySQL. And here you can select the engine version, like the MySQL version. Let's keep it the default one. Now here are some templates, okay. So basically if you select the production template, then it will automatically select all of these features that will be beneficial for your production environment. For example, it will automatically create a multi-AC DB cluster, right, so that you will have multiple instances of your relational database. So it can be an active passive situation, or you can keep standby databases with your primary database, right? So it's everything comes down to high availability and scalability, right? So obviously in production environment you want to go a bit more, right? So if you select the production template, you will automatically select whatever you need for your production template. Obviously you can modify it, but it will give you the most optimized thing what is there. Okay, if you select the dev test environment, then automatically it will create a single database instance, because in dev environment basically you don't need the high availability and durability, because you just have to test the feature, right? So you can go with that. But if you select the free tier, then automatically a lot of options get blacked out, because obviously it will not provide you everything in the free tier. So it is advisable that if you just want to test out the feature of RDS, you stick with the free tier option as of now. So it will not give you any unnecessary options, so you are not billed for that unnecessary thing, okay. I hope that is making sense. So I'm going to stick with the free tier. Okay, let's go for the settings over here. I'm going to name this database as employee database, because we are creating an employee CRUD app, right? So we're going to name it as employee database, and employee DB I'm going to name it. Master username, let's keep it let's say root, and master password also let's keep something. I'm not going to tell you the password. I think you can easily guess it, but still I'm not going to tell you. Okay, they said the confirm master password must be 8 characters or more, so I'm just gonna change it to 8 characters. Okay, let's do it over here. Alright, making sense. So by default you can see that only the instances which comes under the free tier, the EC2, I've told you, right, the underlying hardware is the EC2 instance only. So it will only give you some 1 or 2 options regarding the EC2 instances, because you are going for the free tier, right? So that makes sense. So I'm going to stick with the DB-T2 micro as of now. You can also go for the DB-T2 T3 micro, but I'm going to go with the T2 micro, okay, to be sure that I'm not going to be billed. Storage type, I'm going to change it to 10 GB as of now, not going to take that much. I don't want any enable storage auto scaling. I don't want any auto scaling or something, because I'm just going to work with one EC2 instance, database instance. So I'm going to go with that. So regarding compute resource, I don't want any kind of compute resource or a EC2 resource. It kind of acts like a bridge between your database and your application, so I don't want that. So I'm just gonna say don't select that. So default subnet group, I'll take the default VPC only. You get it by default when you create an AWS account. I don't want to complicate things and put it in a different VPC. So let's keep it simple and let's make it the default VPC. I'm gonna say yes to the public access because we are going to connect to our RDS instance from our Spring Boot app, and also we need this public DNS name of the database instance so that I'll be able to connect to my database instance. Okay, so everything will just choose existing. Okay, I'll give no preference to the availability zone. I don't want any RDS proxy. That is fine. For monitoring, don't want any enhanced monitoring. You will get out of the box monitoring whatever you want. In additional configuration, I'm gonna say the initial database name, let's say employee or employees, let's say, and I don't want any automated backups, so I'm just gonna unselect that, and okay. So maintenance, it will auto upgrade my feature, so let's keep it that. So enable delete protection, it's a feature of the EC2 compute. So what happens in EC2 instance, that if it protects the database from being deleted accidentally. When the option is enabled, you cannot delete the database, so it's a deletion protection. And it's kind of like it is also present in the EBS feature, in the elastic block storage. So even if you delete the EC2 instance, the EBS volume will not get deleted. So that is also another deletion protection feature in EC2 instances. But here I don't want this because I'll eventually delete my database in some time. Okay. So this is the storage estimated monthly cost, but it will not go this much because we are in the free tier. So don't worry about that. So yeah, I think that should be it. I'm just going to click on create the database. Okay, okay, so this database will take about 10 minutes to 15 minutes, I would say, to create. I think about 5 to 10 minutes it will take time to create. So I'm going to pause the video and I'm going to continue after the database is created, right? Okay guys, so as you can see that my database has been created. It took about 5 to 6 minutes to create it. So if you just directly click on this view connection details button, you will get all the details about the database. So this is the DNS endpoint that we are concerned about, because we're going to connect to this database using this DNS endpoint. So I'm going to copy this one, and let us first test that if you can connect to this database or not before creating the Spring Boot application. So I'm going to use SQL Electron or SQL Electron, yes, that's it, right, to test if you can connect to the database or not. So I'm going to add one connection by clicking on add, and I'm going to name this as for example employee db con, like connection. Database is SQL, so I'm going to go with SQL. Host, server host is we're going to paste that we just created, that we just copied the DNS endpoint. And obviously the port is 3306. Okay, so the username is I think root, and the password, just let me put in the password. Okay, and initial database was employee, right? And yeah, that's it. So let's test the connection. Okay, it says, okay, sorry, it was employees, I think, not employee. Let's test it. Okay, so the connection has been established, so connection is successful. So I'm going to save the connection, and if you click on connect now, so it is easily able to connect to my RDS MySQL database, right? And this is that employees table that we just created, sorry, the database we just created right now. So yeah, that's it. So I think that this is connected to our RDS database, so it's working fine. So let us go and create our Spring Boot app, and let's just create our CRUD application, right? Alright guys, so let us go and create a Spring Boot app. So we're gonna go to Spring Initializer, alright, which is start.spring.io. So basically, if you go to this website, you will be able to easily able to create the Spring Boot app. You can select whatever you want, all the configurations and stuff. So yeah, it's pretty simple. So we need a Maven project because I'm going to deal with Maven. We're going to generate the POM files and everything, and we're going to manage the dependency. So Maven will be, or Maven, whatever you call, is going to be a dependency management system. Okay, language will be Java, obviously. So I'm gonna take the stable version of Spring Boot, latest stable version of Spring Boot, which is 3.1.2. okay, so I'm gonna be sticking to that. And here in the project metadata section, I'm gonna give the group as com dot, for example, employee. This will be the package structure of my Spring Boot application. So com dot employee I'm gonna select. Artifact is the the application name that you're going to give. So I'm going to give it as employee or something like employee directory, right? So because we're going to store employees in this application, all right. So name is fine. Description is employee directory app, and package name is com.employee.employee directory. You can keep, or I'm just gonna stick with com.employee directory. Okay, so that's it. So packaging, it will be a jar packaging. Okay, so you don't have to create var anymore nowadays, because the server comes embedded, like the embedded Tomcat server, so you don't have to go for var files now. The jar is fine. And for the Java version, guys, you have to select 17, because Spring Boot 3 and above, if you're going to go for that, then it doesn't support earlier versions of Java. You have to go for 17 only. But if you are using like 2.5 Spring Boot or 2.7, for example, you can also select JDK 11. Okay, so yeah, that's it. So for dependencies, guys, I'm gonna select some dependencies right now. So I'm gonna use this Spring Boot web for the Spring Web dependency, because if you are going to create REST applications or REST endpoints using Spring Boot, you have to select the Spring Web dependency. It is very, very important, because all those annotations like the @REST controller and everything will come under this, and also the embedded Tomcat server, right? So uses Apache Tomcat server as a default embedded container. It will come inside that. Okay, so other dependencies, I'm gonna use the Hibernate or the data JPA dependency, because we're going to create a CRUD application, right? So we have to have this data JPA dependency. Also I need the MySQL driver dependency, because we are going to connect to a MySQL database. Now if you're going to use another database like I don't know, MongoDB or something, you have to add the driver of that particular database as a dependency. Okay, otherwise it will not be able to connect to the database. Okay, that is very, very important to remember. I'm going to also take the Lombok dependency, because I want to reduce the boilerplate code by those Pojo classes that we're going to create. So the getters, setters and everything, I'm going to use annotations for that. So the Lombok dependency is very, very important nowadays, because you don't want to write some unnecessary code and increase the number of lines in your code, right? So yeah, I think that should be it. If you want, you can also add the DevTools dependency, so that it will provide you with faster application restart. You don't have to restart your application every time you make some changes, right? So Spring Boot DevTools is also very, very good. Let's also select that. These are all very, very important dependencies. So if you are new to Spring Boot, then you must work with these dependencies, right? I think that should be fine. So I'm going to just click on generate. It will generate a project, a Spring Boot project, and will get downloaded. Okay, so I'm going to just go over here, and I'm just gonna extract to employee directory. So it will create another folder over here. So this is our project. Okay, so I'm gonna go to my Intellij. So this is the ID that I'm going to use to do the coding and stuff. It's a very handy ID, and it's used a lot, so you can use it. It's my favorite ID for Java development apart from Eclipse. So yeah, so let us load the project into Intellij. So I'm gonna just click on file, and I'm gonna say new project from existing sources, because we have already downloaded the project, right? So and then I'm gonna just navigate it to the downloads folder. Where should be it? Should be it maybe inside. Where is it now? Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go to my downloads folder and copy this path from here and just paste it over here. Okay, so this is the app, so I'm just going to select that, click on OK. It is a Maven project, so I'm going to select that, create and trust project. So it will open up this in a new window. So this is my application, right? So it will take some time to sync up and do the indexing and stuff. So let us see this doing the indexing. So I'm going to pause the video now, and after this file project is finished indexing, I'm going to resume it. Okay. Alright, so I think it has completed all the indexing and all the stuff for the project. So sync is done. So now what we're going to do is we're going to open up our folder structure over here, and where we're going to write the code over here. So this is all the project structure as of now, and this is the main application from where your Spring Boot app will be launched, right? So it has the @Spring Boot application annotation, and this is where your Spring Boot application will start, and it has the main method over here, right? It makes sense. So I want to just first start the application and see that there are no issues with the application. But before doing that, I know that my application is going to fail. Why is that? Because we have included the MySQL driver and the Spring Data JPA annotation, the dependency in our POM file. Because if you see the POM file over here, then you can see everything is there, and along with that there is the Data JPA, there's the starter web and dev tools and everything. But when you see this Data JPA, when you start the application, right, it will try to connect to a SQL database, right? Automatically it will convert to a SQL database when you start the application. But currently there is nothing in this particular application, no configuration in this application which will enable it to connect to a database. In this case I want to connect to my RDS database, but I don't have any configuration to do it, right? So if I start my application at this point, it will fail. It will throw an error that it is not able to communicate. I can show you that also. I can also show you the error. So if I just go to my application, and if I try to start this application, right, just gonna enable it. So you see it has started the application, but you see there will be an error, application failed to start. And the thing is, failed to configure a data source. So this data source is actually the database's connection settings that you have to give, so that it will be able to communicate to the database, right? So it also failed to determine a suitable driver class because we haven't specified anything, right? So yeah, what we're going to do now is we're going to configure the connection settings of our database. So I'm going to go to the resources section in this particular folder structure and go to the application.properties file. So in the application.properties file is the place in your Spring Boot application where you provide all the configuration details for your application, like your database connection settings, if you have any kind of names that you want to give, any kind of other monitoring stuff that you want to configure, or any kind of logging stuff that you want to configure, you want to go inside this application.properties file and you want to configure it here, right? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to another project of mine and copy these properties from here, which is required for the database, and I don't want to type it all, it will take a lot of time, but don't worry, I'm going to explain what is happening over here. So this is the properties. First of all, the first property is spring.datasource.url. So this is the one that you are concerned about, is this cannot configure a data source. So this is the server endpoint or the database server endpoint along with the database name. So you can get that server endpoint from this databases section, that this connection settings that we have over here. You can copy the endpoint from here. This is the RDS database endpoint, right? I'm just going to copy it from here, and instead of this localhost :3306, I'm going to paste the endpoint and say :3306. Right, that is the port for MySQL, and then /employee DB, that was my employees. This was the database, initial database that we had created, right, if you remember. So this is the format actually, guys, for any kind of database you want to connect, like MySQL database. You have to say JDBC colon MySQL colon /, and this is the server endpoint, and then we have slash the the database name, employees, initial database name. Okay, then we have the spring.datasource.username. Okay, so basically you have to provide the username and password of your database, otherwise you will not be able to communicate. So it was root, if you remember that master username that we gave while we creating the RDS instance, so that was root, and the password is password actually. It's pretty simple, I wanted to keep it simple. And these are all the required properties, guys, and these two are not required actually. It's not mandatory, but it is good to have. So the spring.jpa.properties.hibernate.dialect, this property, basically I have specified it as a MySQL dialect. So what will happen is that whenever some kind of CRUD operation happens on the database, like creating a employee or selecting an employee, these are all queries, right? So basically you're not going to use queries in JPA, because the queries will be generated by the JPA itself, right? So basically JPA is like a mapper. You have to create entity classes, and your entity classes will map with the particular table in the database, right? So it will generate all the queries in the background. Okay, so if you want to see all those queries, if you have this dialect enabled over here, then you will be able to see what the JPA is doing in the background, what queries it is running and everything, right? I hope that is making sense. So yeah, that is it. And then we have this spring.jpa.hibernate.ddl.auto equals to update. Now this is a very important feature. If you have created all the database tables and everything beforehand, then it is fine. But if you have not created the tables beforehand, and you want to generate the tables on the fly, I mean you create the entity class, and the entity class will be able to generate the table in the backend database. So if you do not have this property enabled, then it will throw an error if the data, the table is not present in the database. But if you have this property set, okay, then it will automatically generate the required table according to the entity class. I hope that is making sense, guys. Alright, so this was all the properties that you need for this particular application as of now, and let's try it again, and let's run this application again, and I hope in this case will not receive an error. Okay, so as you can see that it has successfully started the application, and it has successfully connected to the RDS database. So yeah, Tomcat has started on port 8080. You can see the logs, it is pretty simple, and yeah, so I hope that is clear. Now we can just go and just create our application and create the coding for our application, right? So the initial setup is now complete. Let us go and do some coding right now. So now what I'm going to do now is, so this structure, I'm going to create some more packages over here, so to make it a little bit more friendly. So here I'm going to create another package. I'm going to name it as controller package. So if you know about Spring Boot, then there are 3 layers in which we do the coding. One is the controller layer, and the second one is the service layer, and the third one is the repository layer or the database layer. So the controller layer is responsible for creating all the API endpoints, right? All your endpoints that you want to create, you have to specify it in the controller class. Okay. So I'm going to just say create, and I'm going to create one controller class over here. I'm going to name it as employee controller, right? So this is the controller class I have created. Alright, I'm going to just name it as @REST controller, because this is the annotation if you want to create a REST API endpoint, and so the controller class should have the annotation as @REST controller. Okay, and I'm going to use another annotation now, that is I would say request mapping. right? And I'm going to just say /employee. So basically this will act like a global URL, /employee, and then like a global endpoint over here, and after that you can add whatever you want, right? Because if you have multiple let me give an example. If you have multiple endpoints, let's say /employee /create, then if you have /employee I don't know, fetch, right? So this one is common, right? So this one is common. If you want to keep that as common over here, you can just say it as /employee over here, right? So you don't have to give the slash also nowadays, it's not required that much. Okay, now here first of all let us first create one endpoint, that is create employee. Okay, so I'm gonna just create a public string create employees. That will be a method, right? And I'm just gonna return a basic string right now. As of now I'm going to say employee created. Later on we're going to modify this method and return the created employee as a JSON object, but currently I'm not going to do that. Let us first of all test if our particular application is working or not. So I'm just gonna say @get mapping. So sorry, this will be a post mapping. You know what, let's first keep it as a get mapping and we're going to modify it for a post mapping. Okay, and it will be a create, so it will be /employee and then /create. Okay, so yeah, I hope this is okay. Alright, so this is done, and let us restart our application. So meanwhile I'm going to open Postman to just check if everything is fine or not. Like, we're going to check this endpoint, right? So I'm just gonna check it using Postman. So it's a tool which you can use to test your API endpoints, right? So yeah, I'm going to create a new endpoint over here. I'm just going to say HTTP. So select this. So it is hosted on the Tomcat server at port 8080 only, so you don't have to worry about that. And then we have a /employee and then we have a /create, right? So I'm just going to say post, because sorry, it is a get mapping only, so I'm going to select get and I'm just going to hit send now. Now you can see that our API is working fine. It says employee created. Alright, so that is cool. So let us go and now start coding for this create employee URL, because it just says employee created. We don't want that, right? We want to actually create an employee in the backend database, right? So now what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create another two packages. Actually, I'm going to create one package and name it as service, and I'm going to create another package and I'm going to name it as entity. And yeah, I'm going to also create another package and I'm going to name it as repository, right? So this is all the common package structure that you use while working with Spring Boot apps, right? So in the entity package, I'm going to create one class that will be my employee entity, because we want to create that employee, right, and it should reflect in the database in the employees table, in the employees database. So I'm going to create this employee entity, or you know what, let's name it as employee only. Nobody nowadays says entity, so I'm just going to rename it. Where is refactor rename? I'm going to just name it as employee. Okay, that's great. Now whenever you are creating an entity in Spring Boot, you have to mark it as an @entity. So you have to select this entity annotation from Jakarta.persistence, and you have to also use another annotation known as @table, and you have to specify what table you want to store this particular, you want to create the table that you want, right? And whatever employee data you want to store, you have to store it in that table only. So I'm just going to create one table. I'm going to name it as employee. So what will happen basically, I have to specify the name equals to. So what will happen, this entity class will get mapped to this particular table in the database, which is this employee table, right? I hope that is clear, guys. Now what I'm going to say is I'm going to create some fields or the columns in the employee table. So I'm just gonna do now, what I'm gonna do now is just say @ID. I'm going to give one auto increment ID, and I'm just gonna say let's say public, so not public, private, long, employee. You know what, employee ID we're going to keep something else, and I'm going to just keep ID over here, right? And we're going to say generated value strategy equals to generation type dot identity. Okay, so what will happen is you know that one strategy, right, where whenever you add a particular for example row in the database, in relational databases, automatically there will be an auto increment ID 1 2 3 4 that will be very unique for each row. So that will be this one, right? And this strategy says that okay, you have to create this auto increment ID in the database whenever a new employee is added into the table, employee table. Okay, next I'm going to create a private string employee ID. So basically this will be the normal employee ID only, and you have to specify the column, and I'm going to specify the column as employee underscore ID. So this particular field will be mapped to the particular column in the database. So name equals to employee ID. Okay, I have to specify the column over here. Name equals to ID. One thing to keep in mind, guys, if you do not specify the particular column name over here, it is not mandatory to specify this particular annotation. So if you do not do that, so by default you know, the columns in the database or the table will be named as this particular field only. But if you want some other column name, then you have to specify this annotation and give the column name like this. It's simple JPA 101, guys. I'm going to keep some other features also, other fields like private string address, right, and private string, let's say department, and private string phone number. So you can use the column annotation for these also. So I'm just gonna select this, and you can just change the names, just name it as address. It's a very good practice to actually use the column annotation, because you know, sometimes if you forget, then it's a problem, because if you want another column name, then you have to go back to the database and change the column name, which is not good, right? So it's also a very important thing to use the column annotation every time. I hope this is good, guys. I want to also add one other Lombok annotations like @getter and @setter. So it will automatically generate the getters and setters. And also I'm just going to use a all args constructor. So it will create a parameterized constructor, a public parameterized constructor. So all args constructor. Okay, I hope that is cool. Alright, so the entity class for our this particular employee directory is complete. So I'm going to go to the repository layer, and I'm going to create a new where is that interface? Okay, and I'm going to name it as employee repository, because if you guys know about JPA, we don't have to create any repository classes or any methods. We just create the interface and just say extends JPA repository, and you have to specify the ID, whatever ID you have, right, in this entity class. You have to specify the type of the ID, like long, and then you have to specify the entity class, which is employee in this case, right? So that's it. Now it will auto generate all the required methods, the basic methods, and if you have any complicated queries or anything, you have to write the method by yourself. Okay, it is a pretty simple JPA thing. And comment down, guys, if you want a separate lecture on Spring Boot and JPA and everything. I can make a separate video on that, but this is focused on how to create a CRUD application using this JPA, using Spring Boot and RDS. So I am just going to skip some of the details. But yeah, this is how you create a employee repository, and you don't have to worry about any queries or methods or something like that. It will auto create all the methods by itself. That's why it is very cool, right? So this is done. The only thing that is remaining is the service layer. So the service layer is actually responsible for all the business logic that you have in your particular application. So in the service package, I'm going to create a new class over here, actually a new interface only, and I'm going to name it as employee service. And in this employee service, I'm going to create an abstract method that will be for example employee and create employee. So it will return the class employee only, as a object, create employee, and I'm going to get the employee details, obviously, employee. So whatever basically employee comes into this method, we're going to save it into the database, and then we're going to return back that employee. Now basically in bigger applications, what happens is that you have some kind of DTO classes, which is data transfer objects, because you don't want to send the entire entity to the client, right? Because there are some unnecessary details or some protected details that you don't want to send to the client. In that case, you create a data transfer object or a DTO class, and you map only those details that you want to send to the client. Like if you want to send some additional details also, you cannot add it to the entity, right? You have to send it as an other class or some other object. So in that case, you create a DTO class, and basically you just map all the details that you want from the entity to the DTO, and if you want to add something else, you add it to the DTO and then send it back to the client, right? But in this case, it's a very small application, so I don't want to create the DTO class, and I'm just going to take the entity and just play around with the entity only as a data transfer object. So let us create the impl classes. So I'm just going to create another package over here, and I'm going to name it as impl. And in this impl package, I'm just going to create another Java class. I'm just going to say employee service impl, and then I'm going to just say implements employee service, and it will throw an error because we have to override the method, basic Java 101. So I'm just going to say implement the methods, okay, and that's it. So we receive the employee. So what we're going to do is basically we're going to say so first of all, obviously, so to we need the repository, whatever we have, the employee repository, as a dependency in this employee service, right? Because see, we're going to use the repository to interact with the database, so obviously we need the repository in this class. So we're going to use dependency injection feature of Spring to actually inject the dependency of the repository layer in the service layer. Okay, so I'm just going to use the auto wired annotation @auto wired, and I'm going to say private that was the employee repository. Okay, so we have injected the employee repository dependency over here using auto wired. That is cool. Now we're just gonna use this employee repository that we have to create a record, interact with the database, and create the employee in the database, right? So I'm just gonna say employee repository dot save I'm gonna just call this guy and say I'm gonna pass in the employee entity inside there. Okay, there is some error over here. Says import type as for type parameter is not within its bound should extend java.lang.long. Okay, so it's trying to think that this is not the entity. The entity should be of type long, right? That's what it thinks. I think I made a mistake with this repository in the order which I specified over here. Sorry guys, I made a small mistake over here. First we have to specify the entity class, that is the entity class type, which is employee, and then we have to specify the ID type, which is long. Okay, that was my bad. So the order was reversed. So if I go back, I think the error is gone. Now it is recognizing that okay, this is the entity only. Okay, and after that we will just return the entity only, employee. That's it, right? Yeah, that's it. That is the service layer implementation. And so I'm going to go back to the controller layer, and I'm going to just change this string return type to I'm going to return type to response entity, and I'm just going to select the type as employee. So it will automatically create a response entity. This is how we generally return from a Spring controller class, right? So it will automatically create the JSON format and the required status codes and everything. You don't have to actually return as a response entity. Other than that, you can directly return the entity as a whole. You can just directly give the return type as employee and return the employee entity itself. But response entity also allows you to send some error codes or some status codes or something like that. So it is popular in that sense. So I'm just gonna say return. Obviously yes, I have to change it to a post mapping, and here we have to receive something, right? The data we want, whatever we want to store in the database, we have to receive that, right? We have to receive that as a JSON object as a payload, right? I'm going to show you in the Postman how we're going to send the payload, but over here also we have to get that particular thing. So in that case, I'm going to use another annotation known as @request. What was that? Request body, and I'm just going to say employee entity, PLOYE entity. So employee, we're just going to keep that. Okay, and here I'm just going to say return new response entity. I'm going to say response entity. I'm going to pass in the employee over here dot okay, I think I made a mistake over here. Okay, I think I have to specify the status code over here. Dot created. Okay, I hope this is cool. So this is the response entity we are returning with the employee entity object, and along with the HTTP status code of 200 which is created. Now basically this is the advantage of using the response entity, guys, and basically in this place, instead of the entity itself, you have to return a data transfer object or a DTO, but in this case it's a small application, as I've told you, right? So I don't want to waste much time. So I'm just gonna start the application now. Okay, I just did a blunderous mistake right now. I'm gonna stop it. So we are not actually creating anything in the database, because we are just taking the employee and just returning back the employee in this case. So yeah, what I'm going to do is, obviously we have to inject the service layer dependency over here, and then use the service layer to call this method, right? This create employee method, and it will create the employee, right? We have just done all that connections right now, and I just forgot about it, sorry. So I'm just going to use the auto void annotation again, and I'm going to say private employee service employee service, right? So it will automatically auto-wire and inject the dependency of the employee service interface. And I'm just going to say employee service dot create employee, and I'm just going to say pass in the employee over here. Now this create employee method is returning an employee, right? So instead of returning back the same employee, I'm going to just take this from here and paste it over here. So it will return an employee. I'm just going to return it back. Okay, so that's it. So let us start the application now, and hopefully it should create an employee in the database. Okay, it is starting the application, guys. So guys, I am creating all of these things real time, so that whatever error I receive, we will also receive the error. We're going to solve it together, and we now also received another error. It says find employee service, it is a required a bean of type this thing that cannot be found. So it basically is not able to instantiate this employee, right? This particular employee service impl. And yes, there is a reason for that, because you have to annotate it with the @service annotation. So it will now able to recognize it as a bean, and it will be able to inject that dependency as a bean in the controller, right? I hope that is clear. So the @service annotation is required because it will let Spring know that yes, this is a service layer bean over here, this employee service impl. Otherwise it will not be able to find that bean, and you will not be able to inject that dependency. Okay, let's run it again. Okay, I hopefully this time the app will start fine. Okay, it has started now. So I can go back over here, and I can just change this to a post request, and in the body I have to send it as a payload, right? So I'm just going to select the raw over here and select as JSON, and I'm going to have to give the fields over here, this employee entity. If I go to this over here, we have certain fields like employee ID, address, department, and phone number. I'm just going to copy all of these things. Employee ID, then we have address, department. So I'm just going to say employee ID is 123, and then we have the address, for example, I don't know, and then we have the phone number. I think the department, I don't know, department is software, and for example then we have the phone number, right? So 9999, something like that. Okay guys, so fingers crossed. Let's send this request to the app, and it says 201 created. So as you can see, the response entity is returning the right status code of 201 created, and the request has been fulfilled, and that resulted in a new resource being created. So let me go back to the database connection over here, and let us test if the employee, the table is there or not. So I'm just gonna refresh the database. There are no tables over here. Let me just see. Okay, I think it is not showing the tables over here. I'm just gonna directly run a query. Select star from employee and execute the query. Okay, as you can see that in the tables, the I don't know why, but the table employee was not shown. But if I directly executed this select query on the employee table, and you can see that there is one row which has the ID, the address, the department, the employee ID, and the phone number. So as I create more employees, you can see that the ID will increase one by one. Let us send another request. Okay, Actually I forgot the employee name, my bad, but it's fine. So the employee ID is 5, address is Bangalore only, software, instead of software it is marketing for example, and phone number is, let's keep it same. As you can see, the ID is now 2, it is returning. And if I go back and run the query again, as you can see, another record was inserted over here, right? So yeah, this CRUD feature, which is creation, is working fine, hopefully, and it is creating this data, everything is creating in the RDS database itself, right? So yeah, that's about it. Let's go and create other CRUD features, like the now create is done. Let's work on the update API. Alright guys, so let us work on the update employee endpoint. So I'm going to go to my employee service interface and I'm going to create another method. What is the related problem? I don't know. So I'm just going to say employee update employee, and I'm going to accept the employee and I'm going to update that particular employee only. Okay, and in the impl class I'm just going to go over here and I'm just going to implement the method. Okay, so here what we need to do, so we accept the employee and we have to update that particular employee also. For example, in the database, if you see, there are 2 employees. So for example, the client sends in that, okay, I have to update the employee for this particular record, so I have to update that, right? Now this is pretty cool. So what I'm going to do now is, first of all I have to get the employee from the database, and then I have to update it, right? So what I'm going to do now is, I'm going to just say employee, I'm going to say, employee repository dot find by. Now this find by ID method that you see right over here, it is fine, but the problem over here is that whenever, for example, the client is going to send the the employee data that needs to be updated, it will not include this auto generated ID, right? Because the client doesn't know how we are actually using that auto generated ID in our particular database. So this ID will not be sent by the client. So so in a hypothetical situation you would say, okay, I will find by this ID, but in a real life situation we have to find it using this employee ID only and then update that particular record. So this is for the database purposes and this is for the client purposes. Okay, that is why I kept this ID and this ID, so that you will be able to understand both the difference. So you have to find the employee by using this ID and then update it. Cool. But another problem over here is that by default that find by ID is only present, but find by employee ID is not present. So what we need to do is, it's pretty simple actually. You don't have to write any query or anything, just have to write a JPM method for that, and that is also pretty simple. If I go into the employee repository, I can write this particular method employee. That will be the return type of the method. Basically, whenever you find an employee by this ID, you have to find it and to return back the particular entity, right? So that is the entity, and then just say find by employee ID. So this is the format, right? And you have to pass in the employee ID, so string employee. So basically in JPA, this is the format in how you create a JPA method. So if you want to, for example, a select method, so it will be find by and then the field name, which is the employee ID. And if you see over here, this is the employee ID field name, and using this particular column name I want to find it. So you say find by and then the employee ID, and it will be in camel casing. Okay. Now if I go back to the impl method, I just say find by employee ID and pass in the employee ID. So employee dot get employee ID, and obviously it will return back employee entity. So I'm just say update employee, So this will be the entity that will be returned back. So this is the employee ID that needs to be returned back, right? Now for example, this is the employee that is coming in. We need to set this employee to this employee because this is where the updates are coming in. Okay, I hope that is clear. So I'm just going to map this employee to this employee that we get over here. So I'm just going to say update employee dot set employee ID, employee dot get employee ID, update employee dot set employee. There is other mapper classes that you can use, but now let us keep it simple. So I'm going to say set department, so employee dot get department, update employee dot set address, employee dot get address, and then update employee dot, I think there is another one, phone number, right? Phone number, employee dot get phone number. Okay, and then what I need to do is I just need to say employee repository dot save and this update employee, and I'm just going to return back the update employee. That is cool, right? Pretty simple. Okay, so this service layer implementation is done. So four fields, I hope that is cool. 4 fields we have. Okay, we have set it. Now in employee controller, I'm going to just create another method. So I'm just going to copy this method from here, this post mapping one, and paste it over here, and I'm just going to say update, and this is going to be the same. This is, we're going to receive the updated update employee over here, and instead of create employee, it will be update employee, and instead of created, I'm just going to say okay, there's some, okay, this will be, the method name will be different, update employee. Okay, so I hope that is clear, guys. I think this will work. So instead of a post mapping, I'm going to use the put mapping. Okay, this is cool. This is cool. This is done. Alright, so let's start the application and let's see the result. And in the meanwhile, I think I have deleted that request for some reason. I'll just create the request again. So it will be a put localhost / employee / update. Okay, so in the body, we're going to send in the employee that we need to update. So if I go back to the database, I'm going to update this employee. So the employee ID is 1235. So employee ID. Okay, this will be a JSON. 1235, and then the phone number. I'm going to modify the address of the department. So address Bangalore only. For the department, I'm going to change it as HR, and I think there is phone number, right? I'm going to name it as 99999. Okay, I hope that is clear, guys. I think this should work. Employee ID, address, department, and phone number. Alright, let's send the request, guys. Okay, so there is some error over here. It says there is no default constructor for this entity, because if we go back to our code in this employee entity, we only have a parameterized constructor. But if it wants to construct a default, construct an object using the default constructor, it is not possible. So I'm going to add one default constructor by saying @no_args constructor. So it should work. Otherwise, you can also add it in the code, a simple default constructor over here. But I have the Lombok, so I'm just going to say no_args constructor, and I'm going to restart the application over here. Okay, because I think basically whenever you are using this this employee repository .find by employee ID method, so it is trying to construct the employee entity using the default constructor, but we had the parameterized constructor, so I think that is why it threw that error. Okay, So yeah, that's why it is better to use a DTO object, because in that case you will have a default constructor and a parameterized constructor. So that should be it. So I think now it should work fine. So I think yes, it has worked, but I think I changed the department to HR. So let us go back to this SQL Electron and execute this query, and I can see that this has been updated. So this is how you can create the update request now. Then we are left with two more operations. One is create and update is done. The third one is read, and then there is delete operation, right? So the same thing, I'm going to go to our employee service interface. I'm going to create two more methods. So for the find employee, so I'm just going to say employee find employee by ID. So I'm going to get the employee ID, and I'm going to use it to find the particular employee related to that employee ID. Go to the service simple class and implement the method, same thing, okay, over here. So we're going to take the employee ID and just going to say return employee repository. I already have that method, right? I just created for that update employee function. So employee repository dot find by employee ID, and then employee ID. Cool. And one last also, let's also add the delete one. So I'm just going to say over here you can either return the employee. I don't want to return the employee. I'm just going to say a string delete employee by ID, and sorry, let's only say delete employee, and we're going to accept the employee, and I'm just going to return a response as employee deleted. So I don't want that employee entity as a return type over here. So employee, and let's go to the impl class. Let's implement it, implement the methods. Cool. Return the employee dot in the delete employee, you're just going to say so it's a string, right? Okay, you know what, we'll just make this void. You can return any other response, but I don't think it is necessary over here. So I'm just going to change it to void over here, and instead of any return one, I'm just say employee repository dot delete, and I'm just going to say the employee entity. That's it. Pretty simple, right? So I just have to update the controller class now. I'm just going to say for the get, we're going to use a get mapping, and for the finding the employee. So I'm just going to copy this method over here and paste it. Instead of put mapping, I'm just going to say get mapping, and you don't have to specify any other URL. I'm just going to say employee, and yeah, we need the employee ID, so we have to use a path parameter. So I'm just going to say employee ID. So we have to send the path along with the URL path. We have to send the employee ID, and we'll get the employee ID from the URL path, and then we're going to send it to the service layer. So instead of request body, I'm just going to say @path variable, and I'm just going to say string employee ID. You can also specify the path variable name over here. Okay, and instead of update employee, we're going to say find employee by ID, and we're going to pass in the employee ID. All right, and the last one is the delete employee. So instead of get mapping, we're going to use the delete mapping, and we're going to just okay, we can also yeah, we have to receive the employee. Okay, so we can use a couple of things over here actually. we can get the path parameter from the path parameter and then delete that particular employee, or otherwise we can send the entire employee as a request body, but this one is a bit better. So I'm gonna just say the path variable employee ID string employee ID and just say delete employee with the employee ID. So I have to change this method's parameters to the string and do something else. So here I'm going to say delete employee. I'm just going to accept a string over here, the employee ID, and in the impl class I'm going to say string employee ID, and instead of doing this, first of all I'll get the employee by saying employee equals to employee repository dot find by employee ID, and I'm just going to pass in the employee ID, and then what I'm going to do is employee repository dot delete that particular employee. I think that is fine. There is some error over here. Okay, update employee delete, and this is a void, right? So I'm gonna just remove it from here because it returns void, right? That's why it's showing an error, but I'll just have to return a string over here, and over here I'm just gonna say this, just going to call this method, it will delete it, and then over here I'm just going to send in a message that employee deleted. Hope that is making sense, guys, because this impl this service class is returning void, so I cannot directly pass in the void as a value over here, right, in the response entity. So yeah, I think instead of OK I can say maybe okay, let's say OK only. Okay, so this is the get one, like find employee, and this is the okay, so this is the update employee. I have to change it to find employee. It's became an override method by mistake. Okay, so get mapping, and this is the delete mapping. I hope that is clear, guys. Alright, so I think I can restart the app, and I think we are good to go. Okay, so if I go back and let us test the find employee, so get mapping and say employee, and then the employee ID, let's say 1235. okay, 35. If I hit send now, we are getting that employee, right? So it's get one is working fine, so we are able to find the employee using the employee ID. And then the delete one, so I'm just going to change it to delete, and let's see if we are able to delete the employee. It says employee deleted, so the employee spelling is wrong. I don't know how I got it wrong. So if I go back to the database over here and execute it, then you can see that that particular employee has been deleted with that employee ID, guys. So yeah, that is how, guys, you will be able to easily create a CRUD application. And I wanted to make it a little bit more interesting, so I incorporated it with RDS AWS. So basically you are using AWS as a managed database. You are using the RDS feature of AWS, which is a managed database service, to create a SQL database, right? You don't have to set up the database on your local system, it's all on the cloud. Okay, guys, so that's it for the lecture for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'm going to link the this project as a GitHub link. You will be able to download the source code and you can work around with it, guys. Okay, guys, so that's it from my side. Let's meet in the next video. Till then, have a nice day and bye bye.